The movie begins and we see a young girl named Jessie who was dressing up for her wedding. Then we see Ed, who was thinking about his marriage with Jessie. Ed is revealed to be having doubts, having learned that his fiancée had slept with one of his friends while on a break from Ed, so he goes down and tries to run away. But Jessie's father Frank stops him and asks him for a drink. Ed refuses at first, but Frank insists, so he agrees and they both start having a drink. Frank writes talk and walk on 2 cards and tells Ed that if you choose walk you can escape from here, but if you choose talk you have to sit here listening to me. Then he asks Ed to choose any one of them. Ed chooses talk. It means he has to sit here talking with Frank. Frank tells him about his marriage life, that how it started with truth and what is the truth wheel. No, in the story scene shifts to many years earlier when Frank was young. He was having a conversation with his friend Buddy in a club. Only then a very beautiful girl named Susan arrives there and they start cheering up with other friends. Then they share New Year's resolutions with each other, where Susan announces to pick a husband from her friends. When she asks that who wants to be her husband, everyone raises their hands, so she asks them the nicknames of their dick and decides that a person with best dick nickname will be her husband. One of them says that he calls his dick by the nickname Squeaky the bald-headed mouse, while the other one says Master of the Universe is the nickname of his dick. Frank says that the nickname of his dick is the Truth. Susan likes it and chooses Frank as her husband by kissing him. After 8 years, Frank is happily married to Susan and they have a 7-year-old daughter, Jessie. Here we come to know that Frank is a very punctual man. He makes a list of daily tasks every morning after having breakfast. When he was about to leave for his job, Susan tells him to return movies, but he says that I don't have time and I don't want to be late for ferry. Actually, he is a professional speaker who lectures on time management. Susan tells him that she has changed their clocks by 10 minutes to give him time to run a meaningless errand for her, but she has moved clock in the wrong way and now he has 10 minutes less. He leaves in a great hurry and reaches to get in ferry, but ferry operator tells him that there is no place left in ferry and the next ferry will be in an hour. Frank misses his lecture because he is waiting for the following ferry. As soon as he enters the room, he starts speaking about the 5-minute efficiency. He discusses how setting goals and assigning priorities to work should be done first thing in the morning, but he enters the room to observe him as he nears the conclusion of his speech. They return to their hotel after the speech and make the decision to hang out in the bar. Frank's speech is appreciated by Buddy, although he appears preoccupied, but he learns about Frank's tardiness and how Susan turned the clock back. He is ashamed of himself for arriving late to a lecture about time management, but he encourages him to do new things and take risks in order to lift his spirits. Frank, who is a creature of habit, dislikes the concept, but he walks away from him and goes to talk to other women. Paula comes up to Frank after he's left alone. They end up sharing a drink after she makes him flirt with her. Paula requests to use the restroom in Frank's hotel room when they are both intoxicated. When she exits the shower somewhat naked, Frank leads her to his room and reveals that he is married and has a daughter. She tries to seduce him despite his refusal to be intimate with her. He gets a call from Susan. Just then Susan overhears Paula laughing while they are on the phone. Frank immediately hangs up the phone, stating that he is fatigued and is unsure of what to say to Susan. Frank then continues driving blindly because he missed the last ferry of the day. He comes across a car wreck while traveling and sees Nancy, who is yelling in labor pain. He chooses to take her to the hospital after helping her. When Frank arrives at the hospital, they mistake him for Nancy's husband and ask him to complete the paperwork. Frank informs them that he is not her spouse but leaves his contact details. Frank resumes his regular life. When Nancy has a child, Susan is informed by a hospital nurse who phones Frank's house one day that Mrs. Frank is no longer there. When Susan becomes perplexed, she tells the nurse that she is Frank's wife. When the nurse learns she could have contacted the incorrect person, she becomes enraged and repeats Frank's address. Frank gets home before Susan hangs up the phone. He is yelled at by Susan, who accuses him of having an adulterous relationship and interrogates him about the newborn in the hospital. She throws him out of the house. Over the next few weeks, she refuses to see Frank or answer his calls, but she does allow him to see Jessie after school. Frank provides a genetic sample in preparation for a paternity test to prove to Susan that he isn't the baby's father, only to learn that he has Klinefelter syndrome, which means he is sterile. Initially refusing to believe the results because of the implications, he is finally convinced by the doctor. Meanwhile, Nancy, having decided to keep her child, brings the baby to Frank's house in hopes of thanking him for his kindness, finding only Susan at home. Nancy soon clears up the misunderstanding. Susan tries to call Frank to ask him to come home, but Frank has been utterly devastated by the idea of Susan's infidelity and now refuses to take her calls. He eventually confides in Buddy that he isn't Jesse's biological father to explain why he hasn't gone back to Susan, but he realizes that Jesse is his child from an encounter with Susan before the night she and Frank got engaged, believing Frank to be out of the picture, but he reveals this to Susan and attempts to win her back, including sending her roses, but she refuses after giving a life-changing speech about living on whim at his own time management lecture. Frank decides to live his life based on chance. From that moment on, he starts his reformed outlook on life with the simple idea of possibility and randomness, by basing his decisions on shuffling 3 index cards with written options and choosing one at random. After the lecture, he sees Paula again and invites her to his room, but he's too drunk to actually perform and realizes that he still loves Susan. He returns home intending to effect a reconciliation, but Susan refuses to tell him who Jesse's father is while she's upstairs comforting Jesse after a bad dream. Frank sees the roses Buddy sent her and realizes the truth. He leaves and plots to kill Buddy. He lures him into a boat which he takes into the middle of the lake, but they both end up falling into the water, but he saves Frank and they make it to shore. On the walk back, Buddy admits that Susan doesn't love him. She loves Frank. Frank realizes that he loves his family. He and Susan reconcile and become a family again. Back in present day, Ed realizes that he does love Jesse and the wedding goes forward. Buddy escorts Susan to her seat and as father of the bride, Frank walks Jesse down the aisle.